social worker called out to the two 8-year-olds.
And 7-year-olds.
In mid-raccoon frolic.
Cutting decks, scattering decks of long ago.
Ravish cards.
Our Micket,
The social worker continued.
has asked about the surprise. But I'm only going to say this once.
And so the orphans re-rounded, collided, a sudden blue jay of a rarity, wheeling as one before finally settling on the fence of quiet attention.
Yes, most Down has arranged a surprise.
A special surprise for you and the other.
Youngins.
This night. But weather seems playing for some delay here, so we'll need to show some
Patience.
Until then, there is the matter of some cake.
Whereupon, and you're instantly too.
Chintana was lost in the swirl and the riot of squeals and shouts until just as
Suddenly, they were gone.
Tarf,
Isay,
Ineria,
Sithis and It'll Micket.
5 white-tailed deer in race.
sleekly bounding by and around the knees of minglers and newcomers.
Racing slick switch quick down long halls, far and away.
Whippoorwills!
Cedar waxwings on air.
Straight at last for those faraway kitchen doors, battering out.
Large slices of buttery light.
Could lose a hand, Chintana laughed.
Could lose more than that, the social worker gleaned.
What sort of surprise is it this year anyway?
And the social worker, already trudging after the orphan, shrugged.
Just a storyteller. Breath, gentleness, and gratitude
Chintana's twin typically counseled.
must precede love.
She was a yoga body, meditating, low carb.
Tibet trekking cat lover.
And a butcher.
That's why, before any heart stuff,
Voice happily prick stitching the shifting.
Cellular connection.
you first breathe and think, and practice breathing and thinking, and gently too, with every breath.
Chintana had tried to practice, but just breathing required so much force it was almost inconceivable to imagine gratitude.
Let alone gentleness.
And anyway, gratitude for what or who?
What about Belinda Kite?
Belinda Kite.
Belinda Kite.
The idea rushed spouts of color to her face. That lavish creature of bleach and gold, proudly pedigreed in the bloodlines of Texas bullery with a predatory...
If cursed-tory taste.
For minor men of all sports.
Usually not citizens, neither.
Offering the poor minority the charity of her shape and touch.
Offering them their reverie.
Who would as casually buy a Mercedes as dole out mercy every other year. Her mercy last year, in the backseat of her SUV with one of those boat people.
A Thai flower man married to a...
Thai seamstress.
A tight, muddy man who could tenderly lift fields of wild lupine.
Blackberry lily.
and lush evening primrose from the grieving earth.
Neither Chintana nor the marriage could afford that kind of Mercedes.
Or survive that kind of mercy.
Pravat never had a chance, and the loss of some larger dream for him.
Some cultural intertwining.
Collusion, coupled with the betrayal, Belinda Kite's and his own, left him too cut up inside. Also gutted and gutless after all.
To carry on.
And to have him,
All Belinda had to do was press into his cupped hands a frail bit of embroidery her own fingers had clumsily threaded, and at points
Bled upon.
barely managing with cruel white work and a forbidden stitch that
Smocking shade of a single.
harvester,
With dark orange wings.
To leave him, though?
And soon after, too.
Belinda Kite was far more bloodless.
A pasty blue-eyed ex-officer explaining in diligent tones how even stepping towards a doorbell could be read as trespassing.
And so punishable by the law.
Chintana found out every disconcerting detail and even
Snip, snip.
Undid, click, click.
Stitch by
the
stitch.
offending thief.
Intoxicant.
Spell cast in lure.
Because Chintana had been the only one Pravat knew well enough to confess his torture to.
When he left in April,
Flights of green-backed herons shrieking in his brow told her
what he'd already made of his wife, but the
Falling eagle on his lips also told her.
he had finally stopped bleeding inside.
He could smile vaguely again.
limply clap her hand with his two riverbed hands, nodding gratefully only because like the desiccated rose of his flowers and tears.
Black crutches. All of it now.
Mere shadows on the gray.
He too, like a passing day.
Was already gone.
The social worker had mentioned other
Youngins.
But that night, Chintana saw no sign of any more.
Maybe the increasing cold or the peculiar threat of a storm.
Or Belinda Kite's birthday.
Had turned parents from wrestling with seat belts and car seats
To those oh so
many lists of babysitters tacked conveniently by a phone.
Jintana rubbed the violet line on her thumb as a woman with topaz clamped on her ears burst past her towards a small bathroom tucked under the main stairs.
Such a painful paw!
The woman's butt stutter sobbed at Chintana.
To no one in particular.
Diving for the comforts of lock and running water.
Thereupon, Chintana's thumb abruptly began to soar a little.
And she felt bleak.
As if 1,000.
Vengeances upon vengeances were dicing her suddenly
Into hail.
Though the cause was none too mysterious.
The front door just stood wide open.
Though when it had been flung so, Jintana would never remember.
The porch lights were extinguished too, oddly.
And what's more, a shadow now cut across the threshold.
Though without moon or stars in the Texas sky, this was an awful impossibility.
For here, reaching towards her, it seemed was a shadow cast by nothing other
Than the darkness itself.
most would have denied the sight with a turn.
a cry.
Flight!
But maybe because Chintana too, day out and night in,
Could so easily consider doing the same.
What would leave these rooms drenched in silence?
and blood.
She welcomed him.
The orphans.
Was all he said.
And Chintana showed him the way.
At first the five.
Orphans.
5 jittery swamp rabbits.
I know some better gophers.
Recoiled at the sight
The
of.
story.
Tell us.
It didn't help that the library had not suited his taste or his hulking form.
Bent and growling.
Had led them up a tight wind of back stairs into a small parlor, already dimly lit with
5 season-poured candles of ginger.
Cinnamon.
Nutmeg.
cloves.
And molasses clustered in an uneven arc away from the 5 dark windows, all tightly closed.
Surely Rose's work.
Only when he finally sat down on the floor did the orphan seem to relax.
Enchanted, quick enough by the manner of his diminution.
So crossing his legs, folding himself into himself.
Refolding until right before their eyes he no longer seemed
Prowling or gawking, but sat quiet still.
Overdraped in his strange silvery black tunic, his head heavily bowed.
Following this example, Tarf,
Izzy,
Enidia,
Sithis and
Mickett sat down too,
crossing their legs, and if not,
exactly little.
and bushy blue stem coat.
that armadillo tight.
wanting now only to know what was inside.
as for the social worker, with her burden of watchful responsibility momentarily suspended,
She took her place in a back corner lounge chair and, stretching out her legs, yawned.
Chintana as well succumbed to her own shadows and seed.
Trying idly to figure out
This figure's peculiar origins.
The narrow eyes or sharp-squeezed brow.
the profoundly wide forehead,
or the dark lips rounding out into the deeper creases of his cheek, all mute and formless, but somehow adding up to something Chintana knew only as
awfully. Or perhaps it wasn't him at all, but another question of origin.
the box he carried.
A narrow thing with angles of glass.
6 feet long, easy, with an ochre sash for a handle above the odd engraving.
T50YS.
The 4 hinges faced in towards him. The 5 metal latches faced out towards the orphans.
The number of latches confused her and warned her.
But Chintana didn't know what to do with warnings anymore.
What I have to tell you,
He began slowly.
I must show you. But what I show you, I must also tell you. I have
Only myself and where I've been then.
What I found and what I now bring.
and it will frighten you.
This was not the way such
Tales for 5.
Such orphans.
usually began.
Mickett cocked her head to one side, and his aide's hands fussed in his pocket.
Well, maybe there would still be some fun, Chintana mused.
Maybe the story.
Teller's strange and pompous gravity would be refused with
Bitterins and
Frowns.
Yet if the cloudy phrases released them,
his ever so slight nod towards the box recaptured them.
All I have to offer is right here to see. But if you scare easily,
You should leave.
Tark looked at his aide,
Who looked at Enidia? Who looked at Sithis?
who looked at Mickett, who defiantly looked back at the dark
man in his long box?
Angles of black.
So they all stayed.
I am a bad man with a very black heart. And it was only that badness and blackness which forced me to seek out what I had.
Carried now for many years, and brought this night for you. Because you are young, I will tell you I went in search of a weapon.
But also because you are young, I will not tell you why I went in search of such a weapon. Though in truth, while I could speculate,
I am no longer capable of recalling the details myself.
When you are older, you will be able to imagine what drove me on such a quest.
You will know then more than me.
But saying this, he did not look at the orphans, only at Chintana.
And maybe it was a coincidence, but her thumb began to hurt a little more.
At first, I went to places I knew.
Familiar places.
I examined ropes and knives of many sorts.
I considered oils and poisons.
I toyed with explosives.
I handled guns. Small guns, big guns.
Guns powerful enough to
Sever something.
anything in half with just one blast.
Chintana shifted uncomfortably.
Where were the animals?
The gleefully abandoned
The
orphans.
stormy skies, appropriate for a
Ghost story for the young?
Where was the company?
The social worker, however, seemed unconcerned.
That, or too exhausted to resist the comforts of her recliner.
But none of it, the story.
Tell her continue.
Could match my taste for what my blackness ceaselessly scratched for.
And so I traveled farther and farther away. From north to
South, mountain to
Valley, coast to
coast, season by
season.
Until finally, I left the country on a ship, setting out for away and far places where faces are different.
Songs cradle words neither you nor I have ever heard.
And everywhere I stopped, everywhere I ate and drank,
or slept.
I asked about
A weapon.
yet even in those distant places I received the same response.
ropes, knives, poisons, explosives, and guns.
I shook my head, and my heart blackened more, and my badness spread so that
Whatever I touched, my badness touched too.
And seeped into.
Until finally, one night on the banks of a muddy flow,
What some might call a stream.
on the edge of another dirty city.
I took cover from a rain beneath slabs of concrete twisted through with rusted rebar.
Tame. It was a shelter I soon discovered already populated.
By rats!
But where I also overheard a story about
A valley of salt and
A forest of note,
And a mountain of
any
One.
paths, and a man with no
harms, who made terrible weapons which he sold but never for
money.
intrigued, I asked for a retelling of the story.
Carefully then I listened.
mesmerizing, memorizing every detail, prodding him to reveal still more until I was satisfied
He knew no more. And then I thanked him.
and I killed.
Chintana jerked forward sharply.
Trying in vain to grab hold again of the words so casually uttered.
So easily laid open.
laid bare.
Unable to believe he said them in the first place, even if his
And
aid.
Enidia did whimper.
And Mickett's head bent down, her eyes suddenly fixed
Absiderally.
on the worn
Print stitch.
carpet.
If only the social worker had given just one indacitation of alarm.
Chintana would have put a stop to the whole thing.
But blinks too of disbelief.
Enforced probably by her own torpidor.
Could merely put both women on a temporary state of alert.
Only his eyes.
Gray pools of Glum Lake ice told
Chintana what he had just succeeded in doing.
He had involved them.
And, what's more, had now made
Them.
accountable.
Soon then,
his always low,
Rumbadilling voice continued.
The gutters of cities.
Curious derelictions, half buried in abandoned farmlands.
Poisonous pools lingering in ancient.
quarries began to speak to me of
away.
And I listened and I
Followed. And after many months in roads strewn,
in ruin, I came upon a course to what I would call the Valley
Of salt.
there nothing moved and I was
Alone. Anything